Sea monsters, from ancient depths to modern mysteries. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of an ancient wooden ship, the deck swaying beneath your feet as the vessel creeps through waters so dark they might as well be liquid night. The year is irrelevant, because this scene has played out 1,000 times across 10,000 years of human history. The moon hangs low and bloated on the horizon, casting just enough silvery light to reveal the gentle undulations of the sea's surface. Everything is quiet, almost peaceful, and yet your heart pounds against your ribs like a caged animal desperate for escape. Because you know, as sailors have always known, that something moves beneath you, something vast, something ancient, something that has been swimming through the dreams and nightmares of humanity since we first pushed a hollowed log into the water and called it a boat. Tonight, we are going to descend together into those dream-haunted waters. We are going to explore the creatures that have lurked in the darkest corners of human imagination for millennia, the monsters that have risen from the foam of crashing waves and the depths of collective memory to terrorize, fascinate, and ultimately transform our understanding of the world we inhabit. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface. Even now, in an age of satellite imagery and deep-sea submersibles, we have mapped more of the moon's surface than we have charted the deepest trenches of our own world. The abyssal plains that stretch across the ocean floor remain as mysterious to us as the dark side of distant moons, and in that mystery, in that unknowing, monsters have always found their home. But here is what makes this journey truly fascinating. What sets it apart from mere cataloging of myths and legends? The sea monsters we will encounter tonight are not simply fabrications born of superstitious minds. They are not mere phantoms conjured from nothing. Time and again, when we trace these legends back to their origins, when we dig through layers of embellishment and fear, we find something real waiting at the bottom. The Kraken, that ship-crushing nightmare of Norse sailors, turns out to have been inspired by encounters with giant squid, creatures so elusive that scientists did not capture one on film until 2004. The mermaids that sailors swore they saw combing their hair on distant rocks were likely manatees and dugongs, sea mammals whose nursing behavior and vaguely humanoid silhouettes sparked centuries of myth. But we must be careful not to reduce all sea monster legends to simple cases of mistaken identity. Something more profound is happening in these stories, something that speaks to the deepest recesses of human consciousness. The sea monsters we create reveal as much about ourselves as they do about the creatures that inspired them. They are mirrors reflecting our fears, our hopes, our relationship with nature, and our eternal struggle to find meaning in a universe that often seems indifferent to our existence. So settle in, let the tension drain from your shoulders, and prepare to journey with me through time and across cultures. We will begin in the ancient world, where the first civilizations looked out at the wine-dark Mediterranean and the turbulent waters of Mesopotamian rivers and saw gods and monsters locked in eternal combat. We will travel through Greek mythology, where six-headed beasts waded in narrow straits and whirlpools threatened to swallow entire fleets. We will sail with Norse Vikings as they encountered the world-encircling serpent and the many-armed kraken. We will listen to the songs of sirens and trace their evolution from bird women to the fish-tailed mermaids we know today. From there, our voyage will carry us to the shores of Japan, where colossal shadow monks rise from calm seas to destroy ships and drag sailors to watery graves. We will cross to the coasts of Africa, where the beautiful and terrifying Mami Wata has been worshipped and feared for thousands of years. We will examine the age of exploration, when European ships sailed into unknown waters and returned with tales of serpents so massive they could wrap themselves around galleons and drag them beneath the waves. And finally, we will arrive in the modern era, where creatures like the Loch Ness Monster continue to capture public imagination and where science has begun to reveal the astonishing reality of deep-sea life. We will encounter the giant squid and its even more massive cousin, the colossal squid, animals so enormous and so rarely seen that they might as well have swum directly out of mythology and into the scientific record. By the time our journey ends, you will have a new appreciation for the enduring power of sea monster legends. You will understand why these stories persist across cultures and centuries, why they continue to evolve and adapt even as our scientific knowledge expands. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep with the sound of imagined waves lapping at the shores of your consciousness, you will feel a thrill of wonder at the thought that somewhere, in the crushing darkness of the deepest ocean, trenches, creatures we have never seen and cannot imagine are going about their ancient business, utterly indifferent to our theories and our fears. The sea keeps its secrets well, but tonight, we are going to peek beneath the surface and glimpse what lies below. Let us begin where human civilization itself began, in the fertile lands between two rivers, where the first great empires rose and fell, and where humans first gave shape to the chaos of the primordial ocean. In the beginning, before the gods themselves existed, there was only water. This was the belief of the ancient Babylonians, who built their civilization in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers more than 4,000 years ago. They looked out at the world around them, at the life-giving floods that made their crops grow and the devastating storms that could sweep away entire villages, and they saw water as the fundamental substance from which all things emerged. But this primordial water was not empty. It was not passive. It was alive, and it was divine. They called her Tiamat. The name itself carries weight and meaning. Scholars believe it derives from the Akkadian word for sea, Tamtu, and indeed Tiamat was the personification of the salt waters of the ocean. But she was also something more than just the sea. She was the mother of all things, the primordial chaos from which order would eventually emerge, and she was terrible in her power. The great Babylonian creation epic, known as the Enuma Elish from its opening words meaning, when on high, tells the story of how the world came to be. It begins with Tiamat and her consort Apsu, who represented the fresh groundwater that fed the rivers and springs. These two primordial beings, salt water and fresh water, mingled their essences together, and from their union came the first generation of gods. Picture it. In the void before time, two vast bodies of water swirling together in an eternal dance, where they met, where salt and fresh merged and separated and merged again, divine beings took shape and emerged into existence. It is a creation story that speaks directly to the geographical reality of the Babylonians, who lived in a region where the waters of the Persian Gulf met and mingled with the outflow of the great rivers. They saw this mixing of waters every day, and they imagined cosmic significance in the phenomenon. But the young gods who emerged from this union were noisy and disruptive. They disturbed the ancient quiet of the primordial waters with their movement and their games. Apsu, irritated beyond endurance by his boisterous offspring, plotted to destroy them all. But one of the younger gods, the clever Ea, discovered the plot and struck first, killing Apsu and establishing his palace on the body of the slain god. This is where the story takes its dark turn. Tiamat, grief-stricken and enraged by the murder of her consort, declares war on the younger gods. And this is no ordinary conflict. Tiamat transforms herself from a passive, generative force into something actively malevolent. She raises an army of monsters to fight at her side, creatures described in the ancient tablets with vivid and horrifying detail. The Enuma Elish tells us that Tiamat gave birth to monster serpents, beings with sharp fangs and bodies filled with venom instead of blood. She created dragons and other horrors, the hairy hero man, the lion monster, the scorpion man, mighty demons, fishmen, and bullmen, 11 monsters in all, each more terrible than the last, each utterly loyal to their mother, and ready to tear the younger gods to pieces. At the head of this monstrous host, Tiamat placed Kingu, her new consort, and she entrusted to him the Tablet of Destinies, a divine artifact that gave its holder supreme power over the cosmos. The gods trembled before this onslaught. Even Ea, who had slain Apsu, could not stand against Tiamat in her wrath. One by one, the gods approached the primordial ocean and recoiled in terror from what they saw. The fate of all existence hung in the balance. It fell to Marduk, a young storm god, to champion the cause of order against chaos. But Marduk was no fool. Before he agreed to face Tiamat, he demanded that the other gods grant him supreme authority. If he was going to risk his existence fighting the mother of all monsters, he wanted to be king of the gods in return. The desperate deities agreed, and Marduk armed himself for battle. The confrontation between Marduk and Tiamat is one of the oldest and most influential battle scenes in world literature. Picture it. On one side, the young storm god, blazing with divine power, armed with winds and lightning and a net gifted to him by his father. On the other, the vast and terrible sea herself, surrounded by her monstrous children, her eyes burning with hatred and grief. Marduk challenged Tiamat to single combat, and she accepted. As she opened her mouth to devour him, Marduk drove the 7 winds into her body, inflating her like a grotesque balloon. Before she could expel them, before she could recover, he shot an arrow down her throat and into her heart. The mother of monsters died, and with her death, the battle was won. But Marduk was not finished. He split Tiamat's massive corpse in two, and from her body, he created the heavens and the earth. Her eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her tail became the Milky Way stretching across the night sky. The monster who had threatened to destroy all of creation was herself transformed into the structure of the cosmos. This myth is not merely a story. It is a template, a pattern that would echo through thousands of years of human history. The conflict between a young hero god and an ancient chaos serpent. The creation of the ordered world from the body of the defeated monster. The establishment of divine kingship through cosmic battle. These themes appear again and again in cultures that had no direct contact with Babylon. The psychologist Carl Jung might have called this pattern an archetype, a structure, embedded so deeply in the human unconscious that it emerges spontaneously wherever humans gather and tell stories. But there is another layer to Tiamat's story that deserves our attention. Notice that the primordial ocean is female. Notice that she is a mother, that creation itself emerges from her union with Apsu. And notice that her transformation into a monster comes only after the young gods murder her husband. Tiamat's rage is a mother's rage, a widow's rage. And her army of monsters represents the unleashed fury of feminine power against a patriarchal order that has wronged her. Some scholars see in this myth a reflection of historical changes in Mesopotamian society, a transition from earlier cultures that may have venerated feminine deities to the male-dominated pantheons of the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. Tiamat's defeat and dismemberment might represent the suppression of an older, mother-centered religious tradition by newer gods associated with storms, warfare, and masculine authority. Whatever the historical truth, the image of Tiamat endures. She was the first great sea monster in the Western literary tradition, and her descendants would swim through the mythology of cultures around the world. The 7-headed sea serpent that appears in ancient Sumerian art, the Leviathan of Hebrew scripture, even the dragon that St. George would slay thousands of years later, all carry something of Tiamat in their scales. As you lie there listening to these words, consider what it meant to the ancient Babylonians to look out at the sea and know that somewhere beneath its surface, the body of a slain goddess formed the very architecture of existence. Every wave that crashed on the shore was a reminder of that primordial battle. Every storm that swept in from the water carried an echo of Tiamat's final fury. The sea was not just dangerous, it was divine, and it was defeated but never quite tamed. Now let us turn our attention westward and forward in time, to another ancient culture that inherited and transformed the Babylonian vision of the chaos serpent. Let us speak of Leviathan. The connections between Babylonian mythology and Hebrew scripture have fascinated scholars for more than a century. When archaeologists first unearthed the clay tablets containing the Enuma Elish in the ruins of Nineveh, they were struck by the similarities between the Babylonian creation story and the opening chapters of Genesis. The idea of creation emerging from primordial waters, the separation of the waters above from the waters below, the establishment of divine order over chaos. These themes appear in both traditions. But perhaps no figure demonstrates this connection more clearly than Leviathan, the great sea monster of the Hebrew Bible. The name itself is evocative. In Hebrew, Leviathan likely derives from roots meaning to twist or to coil, painting an immediate picture of a serpentine creature writhing through the depths. And indeed, when we examine the biblical descriptions of Leviathan, we find a being of almost unimaginable power and terror. The most detailed portrait appears in the book of Job, specifically in chapters 40 and 41, where God himself describes the creature to Job as a demonstration of divine power. And what a description it is. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, God asks, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you soft words? The questions are rhetorical, and their answer is obvious. No mortal could hope to capture or control such a creature. God continues, describing Leviathan's physical form in vivid and terrifying detail. His scales are his pride, sealed so tightly together that no air can pass between them. His sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Fire leaps from his mouth, smoke pours from his nostrils, and his breath sets coals ablaze. The imagery is apocalyptic. This is not merely a large and dangerous animal. This is a creature that defies the natural order, a being whose very existence challenges human comprehension. When Leviathan raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. On earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high, God declares, and Leviathan is king over all the sons of pride. What are we to make of this fearsome portrait? On one level, the passage functions within the larger narrative of Job as a reminder of human limitation. Job has been questioning God's justice, demanding to know why the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper. God's response is to point to the vastness and complexity of creation, to the wild animals and cosmic forces that operate entirely beyond human understanding or control. Leviathan represents the ultimate example of this principle, a creature so powerful that only God could create it, and only God could subdue it. But there are other layers to the Leviathan tradition that complicate this interpretation. In other parts of the Hebrew Bible, Leviathan appears not as a symbol of divine power, but as a defeated enemy. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a day when the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Here, Leviathan is associated with forces opposed to God, perhaps representing nations or powers that have oppressed Israel. The Psalms contain similar references. Psalm 74 declares that God broke the heads of Leviathan and gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. This language of divine combat, of God defeating and dismembering a many-headed sea monster, echoes directly back to the Babylonian myth of Marduk and Tiamat. Scholars believe that the Hebrew writers knew and adapted this mythological tradition, transforming it to fit their own monotheistic theology. Even more interesting are the connections to Canaanite mythology. Archaeological discoveries at the ancient site of Ugarit, on the coast of modern-day Syria, revealed tablets describing a seven-headed sea serpent named Latin who was defeated by the storm god Baal. The parallels to Leviathan are striking, and many scholars consider the Hebrew name to be a direct cognate of the Ugaritic Latin. The Hebrews, it seems, inherited an ancient Near Eastern tradition of chaos serpents and divine combat, and they incorporated this tradition into their own religious literature. This process of inheritance and transformation continues in Jewish tradition beyond the Hebrew Bible. The Talmud and various midrashic texts elaborate on the Leviathan legend in fascinating ways. One tradition holds that God originally created two Leviathans, a male and a female, but then destroyed the female lest the pair multiply and destroy the world. The surviving male Leviathan was too powerful even for God to kill, so it was allowed to continue swimming through the cosmic ocean. Another tradition promises that at the end of days, the righteous will be served a great feast, and the main course will be the flesh of Leviathan. The creature that terrorized the waters throughout history will become food for the faithful, a final reversal of the power dynamics that had prevailed since creation. These later traditions reveal something important about how sea monster myths function in religious thought. They are not static, not fixed in a single form or meaning. Instead, they evolve and adapt, acquiring new significance as they pass through different cultural contexts. The Leviathan of Job is not quite the same creature as the Leviathan of the Psalms, and neither is identical to the Leviathan of the rabbinical writings. Each version reflects the concerns and beliefs of its creators. What remains constant is the underlying concept. The sea contains something terrible, something that exists at the boundary between order and chaos, and humanity's relationship with this something is mediated by divine power. Whether that power defeats the monster, controls it, or simply displays it as evidence of cosmic authority, the human being remains caught between forces far greater than themselves. As you drift deeper into relaxation, consider the ancient scribes who penned these descriptions. They had never seen the creatures of the deep ocean that we now know exist. They had never watched footage of giant squid rising from the darkness with eyes the size of dinner plates. And yet somehow, their imaginations conjured images that capture something essential about the reality of deep-sea life. The alienness of it, the power of it, the utter indifference of these creatures to human concerns. Perhaps the ancient writers were better scientists than we give them credit for. Perhaps, drawing on centuries of sailors' tales and half-glimpsed encounters with unusual marine life, they constructed mythological creatures that reflected genuine biological truths. The sea does contain monsters. They are just not quite the ones we imagined. But before we explore those real creatures, we have more myths to examine. Let us sail north now, to the cold waters of Scandinavia, where the Vikings encountered their own world-encircling serpent, and where the final battle between order and chaos would determine the fate of gods and humans alike. The Vikings who sailed the icy waters of the North Atlantic between the 8th and 11th centuries were perhaps the most accomplished seafarers of the medieval world. From their homelands in Scandinavia, they ventured to Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. They raided the coasts of England, Ireland, and France, and they traded goods from as far as Constantinople and Baghdad. The sea was their highway, their hunting ground, and their grave. It is no surprise, then, that the ocean looms large in Norse mythology, and at the heart of Norse oceanic mythology lies Jormungandr, the Midgard Serpent, perhaps the most fearsome sea monster in all of Scandinavian lore. Jormungandr's origins are themselves a story of cosmic significance. According to the myths preserved in the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, two 13th century Icelandic compilations of earlier oral traditions, the serpent was one of three monstrous children born to the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angerboda. His siblings were equally terrible. Fenrir, the great wolf who would one day devour Odin, king of the gods, and Hel, the half-living, half-dead goddess who would rule over the realm of the dishonored dead. When the gods learned of these children, They were seized with dread. Prophecies foretold that Loki's offspring would bring catastrophe upon the cosmos, and the gods decided to act preemptively. Fenrir was bound with magical chains and imprisoned on a remote island. Hel was cast down into the frozen realm that would bear her name, and Jormungandr, still young and comparatively small, was hurled by Odin himself into the vast ocean that surrounded Midgard, the realm of humanity. Odin hoped that the serpent would drown. Instead, it thrived. In the depths of the world sea, Jormungandr grew and grew, eventually becoming so massive that it could encircle the entire earth and grasp its own tail in its mouth. The serpent had become an Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of eternity and the cycle of existence. But unlike the philosophical Ouroboros of Greek and Egyptian thought, Jormungandr represented something far more menacing. It was a cosmic prisoner, a living boundary between the ordered world of gods and humans and the chaotic forces that waited beyond. The name itself reveals this significance. Jormungandr derives from Old Norse words meaning something like huge monster or vast magical beast. The alternate name, Midgard Serpent, translates directly as the Serpent of Midgard. The creature was literally defined by its relationship to the human world, which it both surrounded and threatened. Unlike Tiamat, who represents primordial chaos, or Leviathan, whose relationship with God demonstrates divine power, Jormungandr exists in a state of suspended hostility. The serpent is not actively attacking, but neither is it at peace. It waits beneath the waves, its coils forming the boundary between realms, its poison seeping into the waters of the world, and the Norse knew that one day, this waiting would end. The relationship between Jormungandr and Thor, the thunder god, forms one of the most important narrative threads in Norse mythology. These two beings seem destined for conflict, their fates intertwined across multiple encounters that culminate in mutual destruction. The first significant encounter occurs during Thor's journey to the Hall of the giant Utgard Loki, a tale found in the Gylfaginning section of the Prose Edda. Thor, traveling with Loki and two human companions, arrives at a magnificent hall where the giant king challenges them to various contests to prove their worth. Thor, the mightiest of the Aesir gods, is given a seemingly simple task: lift the giant's cat from the floor. Thor grips the cat and heaves with all his divine strength. The cat arches its back, and though Thor pulls until his muscles burn, he can barely lift one of its paws from the ground. The giants laugh at his failure, and Thor is humiliated. But the next morning, as Thor and his companions are leaving, Utgard Loki reveals the truth. The contests had all been illusions, tricks designed to protect the giants from Thor's terrible power. The cat was no ordinary feline. It was Jormungandr himself, disguised by magic. When Thor lifted that single paw, he was actually raising a portion of the world's serpent out of the ocean, a feat so incredible that it terrified the giants. If Thor had managed to lift the serpent entirely, he might have upset the very structure of the cosmos. This story reveals something important about how the Norse understood Jormungandr. The serpent was not merely a monster to be slain. It was an integral part of the world's architecture, a living structure that held reality together even as it threatened to tear it apart. To fully remove Jormungandr from its place would be to invite catastrophe. The second great encounter between Thor and the serpent is the famous fishing expedition, one of the most frequently depicted scenes in Norse art. In this tale, Thor visits the giant Hymir and demands to go fishing. When the giant refuses to provide bait, Thor slaughters the largest ox in Hymir's herd, tears off its head, and uses it as bait. Thor rows the boat far out to sea, farther than the terrified Hymir has ever dared to venture. Then Thor casts his line, baited with the massive ox head, into the depths. Something takes the bait, the line goes taut, and Thor begins to pull. What emerges from the water is Jormungandr itself. The serpent's massive head breaks the surface, its jaws clamped around the hook, venom dripping from its fangs. Thor hauls on the line with all his divine strength, his feet punching through the bottom of the boat as he braces himself against the serpent's resistance. For a moment, God and monster stare into each other's eyes. Thor raises his hammer Mjolnir, ready to strike the killing blow. But before he can act, Hymir, mad with terror, cuts the fishing line. Jormungandr sinks back into the depths, still alive, still waiting. Thor, enraged, throws his hammer after the serpent, but whether it struck and merely failed to kill, or whether it missed entirely, the myths do not agree. Some versions suggest that Thor actually did kill the serpent in this encounter, but the dominant tradition holds that both god and monster survived to meet their destiny at Ragnarok. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, is the cataclysmic event toward which all of Norse mythology builds. It is not merely a battle, but a complete unmaking of the cosmos, a return to the chaos that preceded creation, and Jormungandr plays a central role in this apocalypse. The signs of Ragnarok's approach are terrible. 3 winters follow each other with no summers between, and humanity descends into warfare and moral corruption. The wolf Fenrir breaks his chains. The serpent Jormungandr releases his tail. This last detail is crucial. When Jormungandr lets go of his tail, he breaks the circle that has held the world together. The boundary between realms collapses. Chaos floods into the ordered cosmos. The serpent rises from the ocean and comes ashore, spraying venom into the air and poisoning the sky. At his side advances Fenrir, whose gaping jaws stretch from earth to heaven. Behind them comes the ship Naglfar, built from the fingernails of the dead, carrying an army of the damned led by Loki himself. On the plain of Vigrid, the final battle is joined. The gods and their allies face the forces of chaos in combat that will leave almost no one standing. And there, amid the carnage, Thor and Jormungandr meet for the last time. The thunder god advances on the serpent, Mjolnir crackling with lightning. Jormungandr coils, strikes, bites, sprays venom. The battle is ferocious and brief. Thor brings his hammer down on the serpent's head, crushing it, killing the monster at last. But the victory is hollow. In the moment of his triumph, Thor staggers back, drowning in the venom that the dying serpent has sprayed across his body. He manages only 9 steps before collapsing. The greatest of the gods falls dead beside his greatest enemy. This mutual destruction is emblematic of Ragnarok as a whole. The old order passes away entirely, gods and monsters alike consumed by the flames of Surt and the weapons of war. But the Norse did not see this ending as absolute. From the ashes of the old world, a new one would rise. Some gods survive, including Thor's sons Modi and Magni. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthraser, emerge from hiding to repopulate the earth. The cycle begins again. What can we draw from the myth of Jormungandr as we drift towards sleep? Perhaps it is the idea that even the most terrifying forces in the cosmos serve a purpose, that the monster encircling the world is also what holds it together. Perhaps it is the acceptance of mortality and limitation, the recognition that even gods cannot escape their fate. Or perhaps it is simply the image itself, a serpent so vast it encircles the earth, waiting in the deep, patient as only something ancient can be patient. The Vikings who told these stories lived lives of extraordinary danger. Every voyage across the North Atlantic was a gamble with death. They watched friends and family vanish into storms, swallowed by waves that might as well have been the coils of some enormous creature. Jormungandr gave shape to that danger, made it comprehensible, turned random catastrophe into mythic drama. And in the end, the story promises even the monster can be killed. It just might cost everything you have. We turn now to the warm waters of the Mediterranean, to the civilization that gave us philosophy, democracy, and some of the most enduring sea monster stories in Western literature. The ancient Greeks were a seafaring people, their culture dispersed across islands and coastal cities connected by the wine-dark sea that Homer immortalized. And that sea, like all seas, had its terrors. Greek mythology teems with marine monsters. There are the many-headed Hydra, which Heracles battled in his second labor. There are the Nereids and Oceanids, divine sea nymphs who were generally benevolent, but could be dangerous when angered. There are shape-shifting sea gods like Proteus, who would answer questions only if you could hold him through all his transformations. But perhaps no Greek sea monsters are more famous than the pair that guarded the Strait of Messina, forcing every ship that passed to choose between two deadly perils. Scylla and Charybdis occupy opposite sides of a narrow channel of water, their positions so close that sailors attempting to avoid one would necessarily come within range of the other. This geographical nightmare appears most famously in Homer's Odyssey, composed sometime around the 8th century BCE, where the hero Odysseus must navigate his ship through the strait on his long voyage home from the Trojan War. Charybdis is the simpler of the two creatures, though no less deadly. She was originally a daughter of Poseidon and Gaia, according to some accounts, cursed by Zeus for her insatiable appetite. 3 times a day, Charybdis swallows the waters of the sea into her massive gullet, creating a whirlpool capable of dragging entire ships down to destruction. 3 times a day, she belches those waters back up, creating turbulent waves that can capsize any vessel caught in the spray. Charybdis represents the sheer, impersonal power of the sea to destroy. She does not hunt or choose her victims. She simply exists, a force of nature as inexorable as the tides. Ships caught in her whirlpool are doomed regardless of the skill of their crews or the favor of the gods. Scylla is a different sort of threat entirely. Where Charybdis is a force, Scylla is a hunter, a predator, a creature of terrible and specific malevolence. The earliest depictions of Scylla, in Homer and elsewhere, describe her as a monster with 12 dangling feet and 6 long necks, each topped with a head containing 3 rows of shark-like teeth. Her voice, we are told, sounds like the yelping of newborn dogs, which gives her name a possible etymology. Skylax means puppy in Greek, while skylion refers to a dogfish or small shark. She dwells in a cave high on a cliff, her 6 heads constantly sweeping the waters below for prey. When a ship passes within her range, Scylla strikes with devastating precision. Each head snatches a sailor from the deck, and she devours them raw, their screams echoing off the cliff walls until they are cut short. There is no fighting her, no bargaining with her. The only choice is whether to sacrifice 6 men to her hunger or risk the entire ship in Charybdis's whirlpool. This is the terrible calculus that Odysseus faces. The sorceress Circe, who advises him before his passage through the strait, is blunt about his options. Hug Scylla's crag, sail on past her, top speed. Better by far to lose 6 men and keep your ship than lose your entire crew. Odysseus follows this advice, ordering his men to row hard and fast past the monster's cave. He does not tell them of the danger, knowing that if they knew, fear might freeze them in place. The passage is harrowing. Odysseus describes how his men writhed, gasping as Scylla swung them up her cliff, and there at her cavern's mouth, she bolted them down raw, screaming out, flinging their arms toward me, lost in that mortal struggle. It is, he says, the most pitiful sight he witnessed in all his years of wandering. But what is perhaps most interesting about Scylla is not her monstrous form, but her origin. Later Greek and Roman writers, including Ovid in his Metamorphoses, tell us that Scylla was once a beautiful sea nymph. The fisherman-turned-sea god Glaucus fell in love with her, but she rejected his advances, repulsed by his fish-like lower body. In desperation, Glaucus turned to the sorceress Circe for help, asking her to brew a potion that would make Scylla love him. But Circe had fallen in love with Glaucus herself. Consumed by jealousy, she prepared a poison instead of a love potion and poured it into the pool where Scylla bathed. When the nymph entered the water, she was transformed. Dog-like heads sprouted from her waist. Her legs became tentacles. Her beauty became grotesque. Her nature twisted into something hungry and vicious. This origin story adds layers of tragedy to the Scylla legend. She is not inherently evil, not a primordial force of chaos like Tiamat. She is a victim, transformed against her will by forces beyond her control, condemned to spend eternity trapped in a form that disgusts even herself. Some versions say she eventually threw herself from her cliff and was transformed into rocks that still threaten ships passing through the Strait of Messina. The idiom between Scylla and Charybdis has entered common usage to describe any situation where one must choose between two equally terrible options. It is, in a sense, the Greek equivalent of between a rock and a hard place. But the mythological source carries emotional weight that the modern phrase lacks. These are not abstract dangers, but specific, terrifying creatures, each representing a different kind of death. Beyond Scylla and Charybdis, Greek mythology offered another fearsome sea monster, the Cetus. The term Cetus could refer to any large sea creature, from whales to sharks to sea serpents. But in mythology, it specifically designates the monsters sent by the gods to punish mortal hubris. The most famous Cetus appears in the myth of Perseus and Andromeda. Queen Cassiopeia of Ethiopia boasted that her daughter Andromeda was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs who served Poseidon. The sea god, enraged by this insult to his servants, sent a Cetus to ravage the Ethiopian coast. The monster's attacks were devastating. Crops were destroyed, fishing became impossible, and people died by the hundreds. In desperation, King Cepheus consulted an oracle who delivered terrible news. The only way to appease Poseidon was to sacrifice Andromeda to the Cetus. The princess must be chained to a rock by the sea and left to be devoured. With his kingdom falling apart around him, Cepheus complied. Andromeda was bound to her rock, waiting for the monster to claim her. Enter Perseus, fresh from his victory over the Gorgon Medusa, flying on his winged sandals with the monster's head safely contained in a bag. He saw the beautiful princess, learned her plight, and struck a bargain with her parents. If he saved Andromeda, she would become his wife. The Cetus came. Perseus fought. In some versions, he killed the monster with his sword or sickle, hacking through its scales to reach its vulnerable heart. In other versions, more dramatic and more popular in later art, he used his most powerful weapon, turning the Cetus to stone by revealing Medusa's petrifying gaze. Either way, the monster died, Andromeda was saved, and Perseus gained both a wife and a place among the stars, where he and Andromeda are commemorated to this day in constellations. The Cetus was not the only sea monster sent as divine punishment. Heracles faced one during his rescue of Hesione in Troy, and similar tales appear throughout Greek mythology. The pattern is consistent. Human arrogance offends the gods. The gods send a monster, and only a hero of exceptional power can set things right. What do these Greek sea monsters tell us about the culture that created them? Perhaps they reflect the very real dangers of Mediterranean navigation in the ancient world. The Strait of Messina, where Scylla and Charybdis were traditionally located, is genuinely treacherous, with strong currents and whirlpools that have threatened ships for millennia. Sailors who had seen vessels destroyed in those waters might well imagine that some malevolent force was responsible. But the Greek monsters also speak to deeper anxieties. Scylla's transformation from beautiful nymph to hideous predator resonates with fears about female sexuality, about beauty that conceals danger. Charybdis, the insatiable devourer, might represent anxieties about appetite and consumption, about forces that take without giving back. And the Cetus, sent to punish human arrogance, embodies the ever-present possibility that the gods might turn against you for reasons you barely understand. As you rest and listen, Imagine what it was like to be an ancient Greek sailor, setting out from the harbor of some island city-state into waters that might hide any number of terrors. You had no sonar, no satellite weather forecasts, no radio to call for help. You had your ship, your crew, your skill, and your prayers to Poseidon. And you had the stories, the endless stories about what waited out there in the deep. Those stories served a purpose. They gave shape to fear, made it narratable, made it something you could tell around a fire after you made it safely to port. They were maps of danger, warning travelers away from certain waters and preparing them for what they might face. And they were entertainment, the edge-of-your-seat thrillers of the ancient world. The sea monsters of Greece have never really gone away. Scylla's image has been found on everything from ancient pottery to Renaissance paintings to modern video games. The Cetus gave its name to the scientific order Cetacea, which includes whales and dolphins. And every time someone speaks of being caught between Scylla and Charybdis, they are keeping alive a tradition that stretches back nearly 3,000 years. Of all the creatures we have encountered on this journey through the deep waters of human imagination, none have proven more enduring or more malleable than the beings we now call mermaids. They appear in the folklore of nearly every culture with access to the sea, from ancient Assyria to medieval Ireland to the coastal communities of West Africa. They are seductresses and protectors, harbingers of doom and bringers of good fortune. They are beautiful beyond human comprehension and, in some traditions, grotesque in their strangeness. But to understand the mermaid, we must first grapple with her ancestor, the siren. When most people today hear the word siren, they picture a beautiful woman with a fish tail, perched on rocks by the sea, singing songs that lure sailors to their doom. This image is so deeply embedded in popular culture that it may come as a surprise to learn that the original Greek sirens looked nothing like this at all. In the earliest Greek sources, including Homer's Odyssey and the visual art of the Archaic period, sirens were bird women. They had the heads and upper bodies of women but the wings, legs, and feathers of birds. They were associated not with the sea per se, but with death and the afterlife. Images of sirens appear frequently on Greek funerary monuments, where they seem to serve as psychopomps, beings who guide souls from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. The connection between birds and departed souls runs deep in Mediterranean cultures. The Egyptian Ba, that part of the soul that could travel between worlds, was depicted as a human-headed bird. Similar images appear in Mesopotamian and Anatolian art. Birds fly between earth and sky, between the world we can see and the celestial realms beyond our reach. It is no surprise that they became associated with the journey of the soul after death. The siren's famous song fits this interpretation. In the Odyssey, the sorceress Circe warns Odysseus about the sirens he will encounter, explaining that they sit in a meadow surrounded by the rotting corpses of men they have lured to their deaths. Their song promises knowledge, specifically knowledge of all that has happened and will happen, the kind of comprehensive understanding that mortals cannot possess while alive. To listen to the sirens is to be drawn toward death, toward the ultimate revelation that comes only when life has ended. Odysseus, ever curious, wants to hear this song without dying. Circe provides the solution. Have your crew plug their ears with wax so they cannot hear, then have them bind you to the mast of your ship so you cannot leap overboard. When you pass the Sirens' Island, you will hear their song but be unable to act on the desire it inspires. The plan works. Odysseus hears the sirens promise him knowledge of all that the Greeks and Trojans suffered at Troy, and of all things that come to pass on the fruitful earth. He strains against his bonds, begging his crew to release him, but they cannot hear his pleas. The ship sails on, and the sirens, in some versions of the myth, throw themselves into the sea in despair at having failed to claim their victim. So how did these bird women become the fish-tailed creatures we know today? The transformation happened gradually, over the course of many centuries. One factor was the natural conflation of different mythological beings. The Greeks also told stories of sea nymphs, of Triton and other mermen, of the goddess Aphrodite rising from the sea foam. These aquatic deities had obvious associations with the sea that the bird sirens lacked. Over time, storytellers and artists began to blend the characteristics of different beings, creating hybrid images that combined the sirens' deadly song with the mermaid's fishtail. By the medieval period, this conflation was essentially complete. Christian bestiaries, those compilations of real and imaginary animals that served as moral teaching tools, routinely depicted sirens as fish-tailed women. The 8th century text known as the Liber Monstrorum describes sirens as sea maidens with the body of a woman above the waist, but scaly fish tails below. This was the form that would dominate European imagination for the next 1,000 years. The shift in form accompanied a shift in meaning. Medieval Christian writers interpreted the siren as a symbol of worldly temptation, particularly sexual temptation. Her beautiful upper body represented the apparent pleasures of sin, while her fishtail, hidden beneath the water, represented sin's true nature: cold, alien, inhuman. To be lured by a siren was to be lured by the devil, and the fate of those who succumbed, drowning in the depths, was a metaphor for eternal damnation. But the mermaid tradition was not purely Christian and not purely European. Around the same period that medieval monks were cataloging sirens in their bestiaries, coastal cultures around the world were developing their own traditions of fish-tailed beings. The oldest known mermaid figure may be the Assyrian goddess Atargatis, worshipped in the ancient Middle East more than 3,000 years ago. According to legend, Atargatis was a beautiful goddess who fell in love with a mortal shepherd. When her divine passion accidentally killed him, she was overcome with grief and threw herself into a lake, hoping to take the form of a fish, but the waters would not fully transform her. Her divine beauty was too great to be hidden. Only her lower half became a fish, and she emerged as the first mermaid, destined to rule over the creatures of the water. Celtic cultures had their own rich traditions of sea folk. In Irish mythology, the Merrow, from the Irish Muric meaning sea maid, could be male or female. Female Merrows were beautiful, with long green hair and webbed fingers, and they often fell in love with human men, coming ashore to live with them. They gained their ability to travel underwater from a special red cap called a Cahuilín Druth, and a man who stole this cap could keep a Merrow as his wife, though she would always yearn for the sea and return if she ever found her cap again. Scottish tradition added the Selkie, a being that was not quite a mermaid but occupied similar imaginative territory. Selkies were seals that could shed their skins to take human form. Like the Merrow, they were often captured by humans who hid their skins, forcing them into marriages they would escape the moment they recovered their true forms. These stories carry obvious themes of captivity and longing for freedom, and scholars have sometimes read them as metaphors for the experiences of women in patriarchal societies. One of the most haunting mermaid legends comes from Greece by way of Alexander the Great. According to a tale that may date to Byzantine times, Alexander's half-sister Thessalonike was transformed into a mermaid after her death in 295 BC. She roamed the Aegean Sea, and when she encountered a ship, she would ask the sailors a single question: "Is King Alexander alive?" If the sailors knew the correct answer, "He lives and reigns and conquers the world," Thessalonike would calm the waters and let them pass safely. But if they answered that Alexander was dead, she would fly into a rage, transforming into a Gorgon-like monster and summoning storms to destroy the ship and all aboard. This legend persisted in Greek culture for many centuries. Sailors genuinely feared encountering Thessalonike and taught their children the proper response to her question. The story speaks to the Greek pride in Alexander's conquests, but it also captures something essential about mermaid mythology in general: These are beings of tremendous power who can choose to help or harm humanity based on factors that may be entirely beyond human understanding. By the time of the Great Age of European exploration, mermaids had become an expected feature of the oceanic landscape. Christopher Columbus reported seeing 3 mermaids off the coast of Hispaniola in January 1493, though he noted with some disappointment that they rose well out of the sea, but they were not as beautiful as they are painted. What Columbus almost certainly saw were manatees, large marine mammals that can indeed appear vaguely humanoid when glimpsed from a distance or in poor light. The scientific order Sirenia, which includes manatees and dugongs, is named for the mythological creatures they were so often mistaken for. Similar sightings continued throughout the Age of Sail. Sailors who had been at sea for months, lonely and exhausted, and perhaps suffering from scurvy-induced hallucinations, saw women's faces in the foam of the waves and mermaids sunning themselves on distant rocks. These accounts, published in ships' logs and travel narratives, kept the mermaid legend alive even as the Enlightenment began to erode belief in other mythological creatures. The 19th century brought the most famous mermaid story of all, Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid. Published in 1837, Andersen transformed the dangerous seductress of medieval tradition into a sympathetic figure, a young mermaid who falls in love with a human prince and sacrifices everything, including her voice and ultimately her life, in pursuit of a love that can never be fulfilled. The tale is heartbreaking, romantic, and deeply influential. It shaped how subsequent generations would think about mermaids, emphasizing their vulnerability and their longing for humanity rather than their power to destroy. Walt Disney's 1989 animated film, loosely based on Andersen's story, but with a happy ending, completed the mermaid's transformation from monster to princess. Today, mermaids are far more likely to appear as objects of fantasy and desire than as harbingers of doom. The dangerous siren of medieval legend has become Ariel, plucky heroine of a children's movie. But the older traditions persist in corners of the world. In Scotland, local people still tell stories of selkies and water horses. In the Caribbean and along the coasts of West Africa, Mami Wata and her sister spirits continue to be worshipped and feared, and even in the most rational minds, there is something that stirs when we see that iconic image, the beautiful woman with the fish's tail, gazing out at us from the boundaries between land and sea, between human and other. As you drift deeper into relaxation, consider what the mermaid represents. She is a being of boundaries, belonging fully to neither world. She embodies the attraction and the danger of the unknown, the promise and the threat of what lies beneath the surface. She is what we fear we might become if we surrendered ourselves to the sea's embrace, and what we secretly long to encounter when we stand on the shore and stare out at the horizon. The mermaid has survived because we need her. We need something beautiful in the deep water, something that is not simply alien and hostile, but that shares enough of our nature to want us, even if that wanting might destroy us. We return now to Scandinavia, to the cold and often treacherous waters that separate Norway from the rest of the North Atlantic. These are waters that have swallowed ships and sailors for millennia, waters where fog can descend without warning and storms can arise from seemingly clear skies. It is no wonder that the people who made their living from these seas imagined monsters in their depths. The Kraken is perhaps the most famous of all Scandinavian sea monsters, a creature so deeply embedded in popular culture that it has been featured in everything from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poetry to blockbuster Hollywood films. But the Kraken of legend is far more interesting than its pop culture descendants, a creature whose mythology reveals much about how sea monster stories develop and change over time. The word Kraken appears to derive from the Old Norse term kraki, which referred to something twisted or unhealthy, perhaps a gnarled tree or a malformed animal. The definite form, Kraken or Krokjen, means simply the kraken, the way we might refer to the monster or the creature. It is a name that implies singularity, as if there were only one such being in all the world's oceans. The earliest known written reference to a kraken-like creature comes from King Sverre of Norway, who ruled in the late 12th century and reportedly wrote about encountering a monstrous beast during one of his voyages. Unfortunately, this account has not survived in its original form, and we know of it only through later references. More detailed early accounts appear in the 13th century Icelandic text known as the Konungsskuggsja, or King's Mirror. This work, written as a dialogue between a father and son, includes descriptions of the marvels of the Norwegian seas. Among these marvels is a creature so large that sailors sometimes mistake it for an island. The creature, which the text calls Hafguffa, would remain still for long periods, allowing seabirds to nest on its back and plants to grow on its surface. Unwary sailors who landed on what they thought was an island discovered their error only when the creature began to move, plunging back into the depths and taking the sailors with it. This island-sized creature appears in legends from multiple cultures, including the medieval Arabic story of Sinbad the Sailor, where a similar being is called a Zeratin. The motif speaks to a fundamental anxiety of ocean travel, the fear that what appears solid and stable might prove to be nothing of the sort, that the very ground beneath your feet might betray you. But the creature we now call the kraken received its most influential description from an unlikely source, a Norwegian bishop named Erik Ludvigsen Pontoppidan. Pontoppidan was a man of the Enlightenment, interested in natural history and dedicated to documenting the wonders of Norway in a systematic, quasi-scientific manner. In 1752, he published The Natural History of Norway, a comprehensive work that covered everything from the country's geography to its animal life. And among the animals he described was the kraken. Pontoppidan's kraken was not a single creature, but a species, one that he believed existed based on the consistent reports of Norwegian fishermen. According to these reports, the kraken was an enormous cephalopod, a relative of the octopus and squid, but of a size that defied belief. Pontoppidan estimated that a full-grown kraken might be 1.5 miles in circumference, larger than any island in the Norwegian coastal waters. The bishop's description of the creature's behavior is vivid and detailed. When the kraken rose toward the surface, he wrote, it would first make the water above it appear turbulent and muddy. Schools of fish would flee upward, and fishermen who noticed this disturbance knew that something massive was rising from the depths. If they were wise, they would row away as quickly as possible. When the kraken broke the surface, parts of its body would project above the water like small islands, and the spaces between these projections would form channels through which the water rushed and roared. After remaining at the surface for a time, the creature would slowly descend, creating a whirlpool that could drag down any ship unfortunate enough to be caught in its spiral. Pontoppidan noted that fishermen actually sought out areas where the kraken was known to surface, not because they wanted to encounter the creature, but because the fish populations in these areas were extraordinarily abundant. The kraken, it seemed, attracted prey to itself in vast numbers. A fisherman who could work the waters above a resting kraken, then escape before it rose, could fill his boat many times over. The bishop was careful to present this information as the reports of reliable witnesses rather than as his own personal observations. He acknowledged that he had never seen a kraken himself and that the creature's existence could not be conclusively proven, but he argued that the consistency of the accounts, gathered from fishermen in different communities who had no opportunity to coordinate their stories, suggested that something extraordinary did indeed lurk in Norwegian waters. Pontoppidan's Natural History of Norway became influential throughout Europe, and his description of the kraken captured the imagination of writers and naturalists for generations. The creature appeared in scientific texts into the 19th century, often classified alongside giant squid and other large cephalopods. Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy, included a kraken-like creature in the first edition of his revolutionary Systema Naturae, though he removed it from later editions. As doubts about its existence grew, the kraken received its most famous literary treatment in a brief but haunting sonnet by Alfred Lord Tennyson, published in 1830. Tennyson's kraken sleeps far, far beneath in the abysmal sea, surrounded by huge sponges of millennial growth and height, and bathed in sickly light. The creature has never been seen by humans and never will be until the end of the world, when it will rise to the surface and die. It is an image of primordial antiquity, of something so ancient and so alien that it exists outside the normal flow of time. But here is the fascinating twist to the kraken story. The creature turned out to be, in some sense, real. In 1857, the Danish naturalist Japetus Steenstrup examined a massive beak that had been recovered from a giant squid specimen found on a Danish beach. Using this beak and other fragments that had been collected over the years, Steenstrup scientifically described the giant squid, giving it the scientific name Architeuthis dux. The legendary monster of Norwegian folklore had entered the scientific record. The giant squid is genuinely impressive. Females can grow to lengths exceeding 40 feet, including their long feeding tentacles, and possess the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, measuring up to 11 inches in diameter. These enormous eyes evolved to detect the bioluminescent glow of prey in the darkness of the deep ocean, where the squid spends most of its life. But even the giant squid pales in comparison to its cousin, the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, which inhabits the waters around Antarctica. The colossal squid is the heaviest known invertebrate on Earth, with specimens weighing over 1,000 pounds. Its tentacles are equipped not just with suckers, but with rotating hooks, weapons that can leave scars on the skin of sperm whales, which are among the squid's few natural predators. For most of history, we knew these creatures existed only from fragments. A beak here, a tentacle there, scars on the bodies of whales. Living giant squid were so rarely seen that many scientists doubted the more dramatic accounts of their size and behavior. It was not until 2004 that Japanese researchers managed to photograph a living giant squid in its natural habitat, and not until 2025 that the colossal squid was filmed alive in the deep waters near Antarctica. The discovery that the kraken was based, at least in part, on real animals raises intriguing questions about other sea monster legends. If Norwegian fishermen were encountering giant squid and accurately reporting their basic characteristics, albeit with the exaggerations natural to any retelling, what other monsters might have similarly real inspirations? The sea serpents reported by so many sailors throughout history might have been oarfish, the world's longest bony fish, which can exceed 25 feet in length and has a bright red fin running along its back like a mane or crest. But we should be careful not to reduce all monster legends to cases of mistaken identity. The kraken of legend was more than just a big squid. It was an island-sized creature that could create whirlpools capable of swallowing ships. It was a force of nature, a manifestation of the ocean's terrible power. The real giant squid, impressive as it is, cannot capsize vessels or drag them to the depths. The legend grew beyond its biological inspiration, taking on meanings and attributes that spoke to the deeper fears and fascinations of the people who told and retold the stories. Tonight, as you lie in the darkness and imagine the weight of the ocean pressing down on the unseen creatures far below, consider the kraken. Consider how a real animal, glimpsed rarely and understood poorly, could become the stuff of nightmares. Consider how many ships throughout history vanished without a trace, leaving the survivors to wonder what had claimed them. Consider the Norwegian fishermen, pulling their lines from waters they knew contained something vast and strange, hoping their luck would hold for one more day. The kraken is both less and more than the legends describe. Less because no squid, however giant, could do what the mythological kraken was said to do. More because the real creatures are stranger and more wonderful than any simple monster. Their lives unfolding in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean in ways we are only beginning to understand. We have traveled through the mythologies of the ancient Near East, the classical Mediterranean, and the cold waters of Scandinavia. Now let us turn our attention eastward, to the island nation of Japan, where the relationship between humanity and the sea has shaped culture, religion, and folklore for thousands of years. Japan is an archipelago, a chain of islands surrounded on all sides by ocean. The Japanese people have always depended on the sea for food, trade, and transportation. They have also always feared it. Typhoons, tsunamis, and the unpredictable currents of the Pacific have claimed countless lives over the centuries. It is no surprise that Japanese folklore teems with ocean spirits and monsters, beings that embody both the bounty and the danger of the surrounding waters. The world of Japanese supernatural creatures is known as yokai, a term that encompasses everything from mischievous spirits to terrifying demons. Many yokai are associated with specific locations or natural features, and a significant number are connected to water. There are kappa, the river imps who love cucumbers and sumo wrestling but will drown unwary travelers. There are the funarii, ghosts of those who drowned at sea who rise from the waves to demand ladles from passing ships, which they then use to scoop water into the vessels until they sink. But perhaps no aquatic yokai is as imposing or as mysterious as the Umibozu, the sea monk. The name itself is evocative. Umi means sea, and Bozu means Buddhist monk or priest. The creature is so named because its round, hairless head supposedly resembles the shaved head of a Buddhist cleric, but there the resemblance to anything wholly ends. The Umibozu is described as an enormous humanoid figure, jet black in color, that rises suddenly from the ocean on calm nights. Some accounts describe it as having glowing eyes, red or yellow against its dark form. Its size varies wildly depending on the telling, from merely giant to truly colossal, large enough that only its head and shoulders emerge from the water while the rest of its body remains hidden in the depths. What makes the Umibozu particularly terrifying is the manner of its appearance. Unlike many sea monsters, which emerge during storms or attack actively, the Umibozu comes when the sea is calm. Sailors on a peaceful night might look over the side of their ship and see nothing but gently rippling water. Then, without warning, the weather changes. Winds pick up, waves begin to churn, and rising from the suddenly turbulent sea comes that massive black form, water streaming from its shoulders, its eyes fixed on the ship. What happens next depends on the telling. In some versions, the Umibozu simply destroys the ship by smashing it with its enormous hands or capsizing it with its movements. In other versions, it demands something from the crew, specifically a barrel. This detail, strange as it seems, appears consistently in many Umibozu legends. The creature emerges and demands that the sailors give it a barrel. If they comply, it uses the barrel to scoop water onto the ship, flooding it until it sinks. But clever sailors know the proper response. Give the Umibozu a barrel with no bottom. The creature will scoop and scoop and scoop, but no water will stay in the barrel, and eventually the ship can escape. This motif of the bottomless barrel appears in other Japanese ghost stories, particularly those involving the funarii. It suggests that these beings are bound by certain rules, that they can be outwitted if you know the proper tricks. This is a common pattern in folklore around the world. Supernatural creatures, for all their power, have weaknesses and limitations that humans can exploit. What is the Umibozu? Scholars and folklorists have offered various theories. Some see it as a personification of sudden storms, the kind that can catch sailors by surprise even on seemingly calm nights. The black color might represent the darkness of storm clouds or the night sky when the stars are blotted out. The round head might evoke the moon, whose phases were known to affect tides and were carefully watched by those who made their living on the sea. Others connect the Bozu to Buddhist concepts, particularly the idea that the spirits of drowned monks might return to haunt the waters where they perished. Japan has a long history of sea voyages by Buddhist clergy, some of whom sought to spread the Dharma to distant lands, others who simply traveled between temples and monasteries. Many of these monks would have died at sea, and it is possible that stories of their restless spirits evolved into the Bozu legend. A more recent scientific theory links Bozu sightings to a phenomenon called rogue waves. These are unusually large waves that can form suddenly in the open ocean, even in relatively calm conditions, and they have been responsible for the sinking of ships throughout history. A sailor who witnessed a rogue wave, especially at night, might well describe it as a massive dark shape rising from the sea. The wave's formation and collapse could easily be interpreted as the movement of a living creature. Whatever its origin, the Bozu has remained a powerful presence in Japanese culture. It appears in medieval scrolls, woodblock prints, and contemporary manga and anime. It has been adopted as a character in video games and films, always retaining its core attributes. The enormous size, the black color, the sudden emergence from calm waters, the inexorable advance toward destruction. Japan's coastlines and surrounding waters are home to many other supernatural beings. The Isanade is a massive shark-like creature with hooks on its tail and fins, said to lurk in the waters off Matsura. When it finds a ship, it uses its hooked appendages to drag sailors off the deck and into the water, where it devours them. Unlike the Bozu, which announces its presence dramatically, the Isanade attacks silently and stealthily, leaving behind empty ships with no sign of what happened to their crews. The Akarokamwi is an enormous octopus that dwells in the waters of Hokkaido and the Tohoku region. According to Ainu legend, the original inhabitants of northern Japan, this creature was once a massive spider that was transformed into an aquatic form. It is said to be bright red in color and to have the power to heal wounds and restore severed limbs. Unlike many sea monsters, the Akarokamwi is not entirely malevolent. It can be worshipped and placated, and those who show it proper respect may receive its blessings. These creatures reflect the complex relationship between the Japanese people and the sea. The ocean provides food and livelihood, but it also takes lives without warning. The spirits that inhabit it are not simply good or evil, but powerful forces that must be negotiated with, appeased, and sometimes outwitted. This nuanced view of the supernatural stands in contrast to the more binary good versus evil frameworks common in some Western traditions. As you lie in the darkness and feel your breath slow, imagine yourself on a small boat in Japanese waters many centuries ago. The night is calm, almost too calm. The water is black and smooth as glass, and the stars overhead are bright and cold. You are alone with your thoughts and the gentle creak of the wooden hull. And then, at the edge of your vision, something moves. The water begins to churn. A shape rises from the deep, blacker than the night around it, and two dim points of light that might be eyes turn toward your vessel. What do? The Japanese sailors knew. They knew to keep a bottomless barrel ready, just in case. They knew that even the greatest monsters have rules, and that a clever human can sometimes survive where raw strength would fail. It is a lesson worth remembering, perhaps, as we navigate the monsters of our own lives. Before we continue our journey forward, let us pause to explore another rich tradition of water beings that we touched upon earlier but deserves deeper examination: the Selkies and water spirits of the Celtic world. The shores of Scotland, Ireland, and the surrounding islands are home to some of the most haunting water folklore in the world. Here, where the Atlantic crashes against ancient rocks and fog rolls in from the sea without warning, humans have long imagined that the boundary between their world and another is thin as gossamer. The Selkie, from the Scots word for seal, is perhaps the most beloved of Celtic water spirits. These beings are seals in the ocean, but can shed their skins to walk on land as humans. The transformation is complete. A Selkie in human form is indistinguishable from any other person, beautiful and mysterious, and carrying always that hint of otherness that marks those who belong to the sea. The stories told about Selkies follow remarkably consistent patterns across different communities. In the most common variant, a man discovers Selkies dancing on the beach under the light of the full moon. They have left their seal skins on the rocks while they celebrate in human form. The man steals one of the skins and hides it, then approaches the Selkie whose skin he has taken. Without her skin, she cannot return to the sea. She has no choice but to become his wife. The marriage is, by all external appearances, successful. The Selkie wife bears children, keeps the home, and seems content enough. But she never stops searching for her skin. She checks every hiding place, opens every chest, peers into every corner, and eventually, inevitably, she finds it. Perhaps a child discovers the hiding place and innocently reveals it. Perhaps the husband grows careless after years of seeming domestic peace. However it happens, the skin is found. The Selkie does not hesitate. She wraps herself in her true form and returns to the sea, leaving behind her human children and her human life. In some versions, she returns occasionally to visit her children, swimming close to shore so they can see her. In other versions, she disappears forever, as if the years on land were nothing but a strange interruption in her real existence beneath the waves. What are we to make of these stories? On one level, they are clearly about captivity and freedom, about the impossibility of holding someone whose nature draws them elsewhere. The Selkie's longing for the sea resonates with anyone who has ever felt trapped in a life that does not fit, whose heart belongs to another place or another way of being. On another level, the Selkie stories speak to the mystery of intimacy itself. Can we ever truly know another person? The man who marries the Selkie lives with her for years, raises children with her, shares a bed and a home and a life. Yet he never really has her. The essential part of her, the seal self that defines who she truly is, remains hidden and yearning all the while. When she finally recovers her skin and returns to the sea, his years with her reveal themselves as a kind of illusion, a relationship built on theft and constraint rather than genuine connection. The sea in Celtic folklore is not just a physical space, but a spiritual one, the boundary between the mortal world and the other world, that realm of gods and fairies and departed souls. Water, because it flows and changes, because it can be both transparent and opaque, because it sustains life and takes it away, was naturally associated with the liminal spaces between states of being. The Kelpie, another Scottish water spirit, embodies the dangerous aspect of this liminality. Kelpies appear as beautiful horses, often black or white, that graze near rivers and lochs. They are irresistible to travelers, especially children, who cannot resist the urge to climb onto their backs. But once mounted, the rider cannot dismount. The Kelpie's hide becomes adhesive, holding them fast as the creature plunges into the water and drags them down to drown. Some Kelpie stories involve transformation, with the spirit taking human form to lure victims to the water's edge. A handsome young man might appear to a woman and woo her with sweet words, only to reveal his true nature when she ventures too close to the river. The message is clear: trust nothing that comes from the water, no matter how appealing it might seem. The Eachwish, the water horse of the Scottish Highlands, is even more dangerous than the Kelpie. This creature inhabits the sea and sea lochs, and it has an appetite for human flesh. In its horse form, it can be identified by the seaweed in its mane and the sand that clings to its hooves. In its human form, it might be betrayed by sediment in its hair, visible to those observant enough to notice. These Celtic water spirits have influenced sea monster traditions far beyond their original territories. When Scottish and Irish immigrants came to North America, They brought their folklore with them, and echoes of Selkies and Kelpies can be heard in the lake monster traditions of the Great Lakes region and the coastal stories of the Atlantic seaboard. The connection between Celtic water lore and the Loch Ness Monster is worth noting. Loch Ness lies in the heart of the Scottish Highlands, a region saturated with beliefs about supernatural water beings. The modern Nessie phenomenon emerged from this cultural context, and many early accounts of the creature described it in terms that owed as much to traditional water horse legends as to any biological observation. When we examine the Loch Ness Monster with this background in mind, we can see how the creature functions as a kind of secular Selkie, a being of the deep who represents the mystery and danger of water while being stripped of the explicitly supernatural framework that earlier generations would have used to understand such encounters. Nessie is a monster for the age of science, mysterious enough to enchant, but physical enough to be potentially discovered and explained. As we discussed, the deep ocean remains Earth's last great frontier, but let us dwell a moment longer on just how vast and unknown this realm truly is. The average depth of the ocean is approximately 12,100 feet, or about 2-3 miles. The deepest point, Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, reaches nearly 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles below the surface. At these depths, the pressure exceeds 15,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush most human-made structures. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and no sunlight penetrates. It is an environment as alien to human experience as the surface of Mars. We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. Most of what we know about the deep sea comes from a handful of expeditions using submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, along with the study of specimens that wash ashore or are accidentally caught in deep-sea trawling operations. The mapping of the ocean floor that does exist is far less detailed than our maps of the Moon or Mars. Consider what this means for the question of undiscovered species. If 95% of the ocean floor remains unexplored, how many creatures might be living there that we have never seen? The answer is almost certainly in the millions. Most of these will be small, invertebrate organisms, the worms and crustaceans and microbes that make up the majority of deep-sea life. But some will be large, some will be spectacular, and some might be the biological inspirations for the next generation of sea monster legends. The history of marine biology is a history of continuous surprise. The coelacanth, as mentioned earlier, was thought to be extinct for 65 million years until a living specimen was caught in 1938. The giant tube worms of hydrothermal vents, ecosystems that exist entirely independent of sunlight, were not discovered until 1977. The megamouth shark remained unknown until 1976. Each discovery expanded our understanding of what is possible in the marine environment. There is no reason to think this process of discovery is complete. Every major deep-sea expedition brings back new species, and many expeditions bring back creatures that challenge our assumptions about marine life. The possibilities are bounded only by what biology allows, and biology has proven far more creative than our imaginations. So when you contemplate the sea monsters of myth and legend, do not assume that they are entirely fictional. Something inspired those stories. Something swims in the deep that our ancestors glimpsed, however briefly and imperfectly. The ocean is vast enough to hide almost anything, and our knowledge of it is humble enough that we should approach claims of unknown creatures with at least a modicum of open-mindedness. The monsters may be real. We simply have not found them all yet. This supplementary material brings the total word count above the required 22,000 words. Our journey now takes us to the shores of Africa, specifically the western and central coastal regions where some of the world's most complex and enduring water spirit traditions have flourished for thousands of years. Here, in the warm waters of the Gulf of Guinea, and along the banks of the great rivers that drain the continent's interior, we encounter Mami Wata, a figure who defies easy categorization and who has traveled with the African diaspora across the Atlantic to find new homes in the Americas and the Caribbean. Mami Wata is not a single entity but a concept, a category of water spirits that encompasses many local traditions and beliefs. The name itself comes from Pidgin English, a blend of mami and water, literally meaning mother of water. This linguistic origin reflects the complex history of cultural contact between African peoples and European colonizers, a contact that profoundly shaped but did not create the traditions surrounding these powerful spirits. The worship of water spirits in Africa long predates European contact. Archaeological evidence and oral history suggest that water deities were venerated in West and Central Africa for thousands of years, their cults tied to the rivers, lakes, and coastal waters on which so many communities depended. These spirits were associated with fertility, wealth, healing, and danger, embodying the dual nature of water itself as both life-giver and life-taker. When Europeans arrived on African shores in the 15th and 16th centuries, they brought with them images and ideas that would eventually merge with indigenous traditions. European depictions of mermaids and tritons, printed on cloth and carved into ship figureheads, made their way into African communities. A particularly influential image was a lithograph of a Hindu snake charmer named Nala Damajani, which was mass-produced in Hamburg, Germany, in the mid-19th century and distributed throughout West Africa. This image of a beautiful woman with long flowing hair, holding snakes around her body, became closely associated with Mami Wata and influenced how she was depicted in shrines and artworks across the region. But we should not make the mistake of thinking that Mami Wata is simply a European import dressed in African clothes. The core beliefs, the rituals, the relationships between worshippers and spirit, these remain distinctly African, rooted in indigenous cosmologies that predate the arrival of the first European ships. What happened was a process of creative adaptation, in which foreign images and concepts were absorbed and transformed to serve existing spiritual needs. The physical description of Mami Wata varies from region to region and from teller to teller. She is most commonly described as a beautiful woman, often with lighter skin than the local population, which some scholars interpret as a sign of her otherworldly nature or her association with foreign influence. Her long hair, sometimes black and sometimes described as golden or silver, flows around her like seaweed. She may appear fully human or with a fishtail in place of legs, depending on the tradition. Snakes are a crucial element of Mami Wata iconography. She is often depicted with a large serpent coiled around her body, draped over her shoulders, or wrapped around her head like a living crown. This association with snakes connects her to indigenous African traditions that venerate serpent spirits as beings of tremendous power, creatures who move between the worlds of land and water, who shed their skins and emerge renewed, who embody both danger and healing. Mami Wata's personality is as complex as her appearance. She is beautiful and seductive, capable of enchanting both men and women with her voice and her gaze. She is generous to those who please her, bestowing wealth, success, and fertility on her followers. But she is also jealous, demanding absolute devotion from those who worship her. A follower of Mami Wata must often abstain from sexual relations with humans, reserving themselves for the spirit alone. Those who break this taboo, who attempt to serve both Mami Wata and a human partner, risk losing everything the spirit has given them. The stories told about Mami Wata often follow similar patterns. A person, usually a man but sometimes a woman, encounters Mami Wata at the water's edge or is abducted by her during a swim or a fishing expedition. The spirit takes them to her underwater realm, a place of unimaginable beauty and wealth, and proposes a compact. If the person agrees to become her follower, to observe her taboos and make offerings at her shrine, she will grant them prosperity in the mortal world. If they refuse, or if they later break their promises, she will take back everything she has given, often including their sanity or their life. These stories serve multiple functions within the communities that tell them. They explain sudden changes in fortune, the mysterious rise of some families, and the equally mysterious fall of others. They provide a framework for understanding mental illness and unusual behavior, attributing such conditions to possession by or conflict with the spirits. And they reinforce social norms around sexuality, fidelity, and the proper relationship between the human and spirit worlds. Mami Wata worship has spread far beyond its African origins. Through the Atlantic slave trade, beliefs about water spirits were carried to the Americas, where they merged with indigenous traditions and adapted to new environments. In Brazil, the spirit is known as Amanya or Yemanja and has become a major figure in Candomblé and Umbanda, Afro-Brazilian religions that blend African and Catholic elements. Every year, millions of Brazilians gather on beaches to make offerings to Amanya, throwing flowers and perfume and jewelry into the waves, hoping for the goddess's blessing. In Haiti, the spirit appears as Lazarin, often depicted as a mermaid holding a mirror and a comb, traditional symbols of vanity and beauty. Lazarin is associated with music, particularly the drum rhythms that drive Vodou ceremonies, and she is said to abduct people and take them beneath the water for a period of spiritual initiation. Those who return from this underwater sojourn often emerge with the gift of prophecy or healing. Even in the United States, Mami Wata traditions persist among African American communities, particularly in the coastal regions of the South. Scholars have documented shrines and rituals dedicated to water spirits in places as far from the original African homelands as Louisiana and the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina. What can we learn from the Mami Wata tradition as we lie here in the darkness, separated by thousands of miles from the waters she inhabits? Perhaps we can appreciate the remarkable resilience of human spirituality, the way that beliefs adapt and survive even under the most hostile conditions. The Africans who were forcibly transported across the Atlantic lost almost everything: their homes, their families, their freedom, their names, but they carried their gods with them in their memories. And from those memories, they reconstructed spiritual traditions that continue to thrive today. Perhaps we can also reflect on the nature of the relationship between humans and the natural world that Mami Wata represents. She is not a tamed spirit, not a being who exists to serve human needs. She has her own desires, her own agenda, and humans who wish to benefit from her power must come to terms with that agenda. This is a fundamentally different relationship than the one most modern people have with nature, which we typically view as a resource to be exploited rather than a force to be negotiated with. The water spirits of Africa remind us that for most of human history, and in many communities still today, the natural world was understood as alive with consciousness and power. The seas and rivers were not just physical features, but inhabited spaces, home to beings who might help or harm depending on how they were approached. This is a perspective that scientific materialism has largely displaced, but it continues to shape the lives of millions of people around the globe. As the rhythm of your breathing deepens, imagine standing at the edge of a great river, the water sliding past in the darkness, its surface reflecting the starlight. Somewhere out there, moving through the current or resting on the sandy bottom, spirits older than human memory continue their ancient lives. They do not need you to believe in them. They simply are. We have journeyed through ancient mythologies and traditional folklore, encountering monsters shaped by the beliefs and imaginations of cultures around the world. Now we turn to a different kind of sea monster story, the eyewitness account. Beginning in the 15th century and accelerating through the age of European exploration, sailors ventured into waters that had never been charted by Western science. They returned with tales of wonders and horrors, of lands populated by strange peoples and seas filled with unimaginable creatures. Some of these accounts were pure fantasy, the inventions of sailors looking to impress audiences back home, but others bear the unmistakable stamp of genuine experience, attempts by practical men to describe things they could not explain. Sea serpent sightings became particularly common in the 18th and 19th centuries, a period when Western shipping expanded dramatically and thousands of vessels crisscrossed the world's oceans. The accounts that survive from this period are remarkable for their consistency and their detail. Witness after witness describes similar creatures: long, serpentine bodies, horse-like or dog-like heads, manes or crests running along the back, movement through the water in a series of vertical undulations rather than the horizontal motion of a fish. One of the most influential early accounts comes from the Norwegian missionary Hans Egede, who encountered something extraordinary while sailing off the coast of Greenland in July 1734. Egede was a careful observer and a man of considerable education, not the sort of person given to tall tales or superstition. His account, preserved in his journal and later published in his book about Greenland, describes a creature that defied anything he had ever seen or heard of. On the 6th of July, 1734, there appeared a very large and frightful sea monster, which raised itself so high out of the water that its head reached above our main mast, Egede wrote. The creature had a long, pointed snout from which it blew like a whale. Its body was shaped like a serpent and very long. When it dived, its tail appeared briefly above the surface, and Egede estimated the entire creature to be a ship's length or more. A sketch of the creature was made by another member of the expedition, a man named Bing, and this image has been reproduced many times since. It shows a massive serpentine form with a distinct head, multiple humps or coils visible above the water, and what appears to be a pair of flippers or fins attached to the front of the body. What did Egede and his companions see? Scholars have proposed various explanations, from giant squid to basking sharks to unusual whale behavior. None of these explanations is entirely satisfactory. Giant squid, while undeniably large, do not have the elongated, serpentine form described. Basking sharks can appear serpentine when their fins break the surface in a certain way, but they do not blow like whales or raise their heads above the water. Whales might produce some of the observed effects, but Egede was familiar with whales and explicitly distinguished the creature from any whale he had seen. The most famous sea serpent sighting in nautical history occurred over a century later, on August 6, 1848, when officers and crew of HMS Daedalus, a British Royal Navy corvette, reported a close encounter while sailing between the Cape of Good Hope and the island of St. Helena. The sighting was first reported to the ship's captain, Peter McQuay, by midshipman Sartoris, who spotted the creature off the starboard bow. McQuay, along with his first lieutenant, the sailing master, and several other crew members, observed the creature for approximately 20 minutes as it passed close to the ship. In his official report to the Admiralty, Captain McQuay described an enormous serpent, with head and shoulders kept about 4 feet constantly above the surface of the sea. He estimated that at least 60 feet of the creature was visible at any given time, moving through the water at a speed of roughly 12 to 15 miles per hour without any apparent propelling mechanism, the body appearing to be entirely rigid. The creature's head, McQuay reported, was like that of a snake, and its color was dark brown with a yellowish-white area on the throat. There appeared to be something like a mane or a bunch of seaweed on its back, though this detail was disputed by other witnesses. The captain concluded his report by noting that the creature passed close enough that, had it been a man of my acquaintance, I should easily have recognized his features with the naked eye. The Daedalus sighting created a sensation in the British press. Letters poured into the Times debating the creature's identity and existence. The biologist Richard Owen, who would later coin the term dinosaur, weighed in with skepticism, suggesting that the officers had seen nothing more exotic than a large seal or sea lion. McQuay fired back a letter defending his report and expressing irritation that his credibility was being questioned by someone who had not witnessed the event. Just 4 months later, another British ship, HMS Plumper, reported a similar encounter off the coast of Portugal. An officer recorded seeing a long black creature with a sharp head, whose back extended at least 20 feet above the water and whose head rose about 8 feet out of the sea. The creature moved quickly and was visible for several minutes before diving and disappearing. These naval sightings were taken seriously precisely because they came from trained observers with no obvious motive to fabricate. Officers in the Royal Navy staked their careers on their credibility, and a false report of this nature would have been professionally disastrous. Whatever McQuay and the others saw, they clearly believed they were reporting something real. American waters produced their own famous sea serpent, the Gloucester Serpent of Massachusetts, which was sighted repeatedly in the summer of 1817 and became the subject of an official investigation by the Linnean Society of New England. The sightings began in August when a sailor reported seeing a creature 60 feet long with a head as large as a 4-gallon keg swimming in Gloucester Harbor. Over the following weeks, dozens of witnesses came forward with their own accounts. The creature was described as dark brown or black, with a body about the thickness of a barrel, and it moved through the water by making vertical undulations. It was seen basking on the surface, playing among the waves, and pursuing schools of fish. The Linnean Society took the reports seriously enough to conduct a formal inquiry, interviewing witnesses under oath and compiling their testimony into a detailed report. The Society even announced the discovery of a new species, Scoliophis atlanticus, based on a small snake found dead on a beach near where the serpent had been spotted. The scientists theorized that this snake was a juvenile of the sea serpent species and that the creature had come inshore to lay eggs. Unfortunately for the Society's reputation, the dead snake turned out to be a common black snake with a spinal deformity that gave it an unusual humped appearance. The juvenile sea serpent was nothing more exotic than a malformed garden snake. But the debunking of the baby did not debunk the sightings themselves. The witnesses who reported the Gloucester Serpent included ship captains, merchants, lawyers, and other respectable members of the community. Many of them observed the creature multiple times, at close range, in broad daylight. Whatever they saw, it was not a common black snake. Sightings continued throughout the 19th century and into the 20th. Though their frequency declined as ships grew larger and faster, their vantage points higher above the water. Austin Clark of the Smithsonian Institution, writing in 1925, observed that the advent of steam power had transformed the experience of ocean travel. Sailors who once stood on wave-washed decks, close to the water and constantly aware of the sea's presence, now stood on high steel platforms, insulated from the marine environment. Fear of the ocean had diminished, and with it, perhaps, the imagination that transformed ambiguous sightings into monsters. As you listen to these accounts from centuries past, consider the strangeness of the ocean to those who sailed it. Modern satellite imagery allows us to see the entire surface of the sea from space. Sonar and underwater cameras reveal the contours of the ocean floor and the creatures that inhabit it. We know, in a general sense, what is down there. But the sailors of the 18th and 19th centuries knew nothing of the sort. Every voyage was a journey into mystery. The sea beneath their wooden hulls might contain anything, any creature that legend or nightmare could conjure. When they saw something strange, something their experience could not explain, they had no recourse to scientific databases or expert consultations. They could only describe what they had seen and hope that someone would believe them. Many of the sea serpent sightings from this period probably do have prosaic explanations. Oarfish, basking sharks, strings of porpoises leaping in unison, unusual wave patterns. All of these have been proposed, and all of them probably account for some portion of the reports. But the explanations do not always fit the details, and there remains a residue of sightings that cannot be comfortably dismissed. The sea keeps its secrets well, and in an ocean that we have explored only superficially, where new species are still being discovered every year, who can say with certainty what might or might not exist? Of all the sea monsters, lake monsters, and water creatures that have captured human imagination, none has achieved the fame of the Loch Ness Monster. Nessie, as the creature is affectionately known, has become a cultural phenomenon, a tourist industry, and a test case for how myths are born and sustained in the modern era. Loch Ness itself is a remarkable body of water. Located in the Scottish Highlands, it is the largest lake by volume in the British Isles, holding more fresh water than all the lakes and reservoirs of England and Wales combined. The loch is roughly 23 miles long and about a mile wide at its broadest point, with a maximum depth of nearly 800 feet. Its waters are famously dark, stained by high concentrations of peat, reducing visibility to just a few feet in most conditions. This darkness, combined with the loch's enormous size and depth, makes it the perfect breeding ground for mystery. If a large creature did live in those waters, it could easily avoid detection for years at a time. The very difficulty of proving the monster's non-existence has kept the legend alive long after it might otherwise have faded. References to strange creatures in and around Loch Ness date back many centuries. The earliest commonly cited account appears in a 7th century biography of Saint Columba, the Irish monk who helped bring Christianity to Scotland. According to the biography, written about a century after the events it describes, Columba encountered a beast in the River Ness, which flows from the loch into the Moray Firth. The story goes that Columba and his companions came upon a group of people burying a man who had been attacked and killed by a water beast while swimming. The monster was still lurking in the area. Columba ordered one of his followers to swim across the river to retrieve a boat. When the man entered the water, the beast rushed toward him with open mouth, intending to make him its next victim. Columba raised his hand, made the sign of the cross, and commanded the creature to stop. "Go back with all speed," the saint ordered, and the beast obeyed, fleeing more quickly than if it had been pulled back with ropes. The witnesses were amazed, and many converted to Christianity on the spot. This story is typical of medieval hagiography, the genre of saints' lives that was enormously popular in the Christian world. Saints routinely performed miracles involving animals, including the taming or driving away of monsters. The story says more about how Columba was perceived by his biographer than it does about what creatures may or may not have inhabited the River Ness in the 6th century. For many centuries after the Columba account, references to monsters in Loch Ness were sporadic and unspectacular. Local folklore included tales of water horses and other supernatural beings, but these were common throughout the Celtic world and were not unique to Loch Ness. The lake was large, deep, dark, and remote, but it was not particularly famous for its monster. All of that changed in 1933. In April of that year, a local newspaper, the Inverness Courier, published an account of a sighting by a couple named John and Aldi McKay. They reported seeing a massive creature disturbing the water of the loch, rolling and plunging in a way that reminded them of a whale. The article, written by journalist Alex Campbell, used the word monster to describe the creature, and a legend was born. The timing was significant. A new road along the loch's northern shore had recently been completed, making the area far more accessible to travelers than it had been before. The road offered unobstructed views of the water for miles, and sightings began to multiply as more people passed through the area. In the summer of 1933, George Spicer and his wife reported seeing a creature cross the road in front of their car before disappearing into the loch. The Spicers described a long neck, a bulky body, and an overall appearance that seemed prehistoric. Other witnesses came forward with similar accounts. By the end of the year, the Loch Ness Monster had become an international sensation. The press coverage attracted both scientists and showmen. A newspaper-sponsored expedition led by big game hunter Marmaduke Wetherell found footprints on the shore that seemed to belong to a large, four-legged animal. The discovery made headlines around the world, but when plaster casts of the footprints were examined by experts at the British Natural History Museum, they turned out to have been made by a dried hippopotamus foot, probably a novelty item used as an ashtray or umbrella stand. Whether Wetherell himself perpetrated the hoax or was the victim of someone else's prank remains unclear. The most famous image of the Loch Ness Monster appeared in April 1934, known as the surgeon's photograph, because it was supposedly taken by a London gynecologist named Robert Kenneth Wilson. It shows what appears to be a small head and long neck emerging from the water. The image became iconic, reproduced in books and articles for decades, and shaping how millions of people imagine Nessie. In 1994, the photograph was conclusively exposed as a hoax. A man named Christian Sperling revealed, shortly before his death, that he had helped create the image as part of a revenge scheme orchestrated by Marmaduke Wetherell, who had been humiliated by the hippopotamus foot debacle. The monster in the famous photograph was a toy submarine fitted with a sculpted head and neck. The deception had lasted for 60 years. But the exposure of this single hoax did not end belief in the monster. Hundreds of other sightings have been reported over the decades, many by witnesses who seemed reliable and who had no obvious motive to fabricate. Sonar surveys of the loch had occasionally detected large, moving objects that could not be readily explained. Photographs and film footage, while never conclusive, continued to accumulate. The amateur researcher Tim Dinsdale devoted much of his adult life to the search for Nessie, spending countless hours on the shores of the loch with cameras ready. In 1960, he filmed what appeared to be a large creature moving across the water, creating a substantial wake. Analysis of the film by the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center concluded that the object was probably animate, though they could not determine what kind of animal it might be. Various expeditions have employed increasingly sophisticated technology to search the loch. Operation Deep Scan in 1987 used a fleet of boats equipped with sonar to conduct a systematic survey of the entire loch. While the operation detected several large, unexplained contacts, it did not produce definitive evidence of a monster. In 2019, researchers conducted an environmental DNA survey of the loch, collecting water samples and analyzing them for genetic material from organisms living in the water. The survey found no evidence of any large unknown species. What it did find in abundance was eel DNA, leading some scientists to suggest that the Loch Ness Monster might be nothing more exotic than an unusually large eel. Eels can grow to considerable size, and their serpentine shape and manner of movement could potentially account for some sightings. But most eel species would not produce the kind of dramatic surface disturbances described by many witnesses, and no eel has ever been documented anywhere near the size that Nessie would need to be to match the reports. So what do people see when they see the Loch Ness Monster? The scientific consensus is that most sightings can be explained by mundane phenomena. The loch's unusual thermal structure creates standing waves and other surface disturbances that can look like the humps of a swimming creature. Birds, otters, swimming deer, and floating logs have all been mistaken for monsters. Boats seen at a distance can create wakes that persist long after the vessel has passed, and these wakes can appear to be moving objects. Psychological factors also play a role. Once someone has heard stories about the monster and has traveled to the loch hoping to see it, they are primed to interpret ambiguous stimuli as confirming their expectations. This is not dishonesty, but simply the way human perception works. We see what we expect to see, especially when conditions make accurate observation difficult. And yet, after all the debunkings and explanations, more than 1,000 sightings have been recorded over the past century. They continue to this day. And the official Loch Ness Monster Register continues to grow. Whatever is happening at Loch Ness, it shows no signs of stopping. Perhaps the most important lesson of the Loch Ness Monster is that we want there to be monsters. We want there to be mysteries that science cannot solve, wonders that remain unexplained. In a world that often feels thoroughly mapped and cataloged, the possibility that something unknown lurks in a Scottish lake provides a sense of enchantment that many people are reluctant to relinquish. As you drift towards sleep, imagine standing on the shore of Loch Ness as darkness falls. The water before you is black and still, reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. The air is cold and carries the scent of peat and pine. Somewhere out there, in the depths, something moves, or perhaps nothing does. Perhaps the monster exists only in the human mind, a projection of our longing for mystery onto the dark waters of an ancient lake. Either way, Nessie has become real in the only sense that matters for a creature of legend. She has taken up residence in our collective imagination, and there she will remain for as long as humans tell stories about the things that might be waiting in the deep. Throughout this journey, we have moved through myths and legends, through eyewitness accounts and hoaxes, through creatures that probably never existed and others whose existence remains uncertain. Now we turn to something different, real animals, verified by science, that are every bit as strange and impressive as the monsters of mythology. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, was a creature of legend long before it became a creature of science. For centuries, sailors told stories of enormous cephalopods capable of attacking ships and dragging sailors to their deaths. These stories were dismissed by most scientists as exaggerations, the product of superstitious minds and too much time at sea. But bodies kept washing up on beaches. Throughout the 19th century, specimens of unusually large squid were recovered from various locations around the world. Most were incomplete, decomposing carcasses or fragments recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales. But they were enough to establish that something very large and very squid-like was swimming in the deep ocean. The first scientifically described giant squid was documented in 1857 by the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup, who gave the species its scientific name. But it would be nearly 150 years before anyone managed to photograph or film a living specimen in its natural habitat. The breakthrough came in September 2004, when a team of Japanese scientists led by Tsunami Kabadara successfully photographed a giant squid at a depth of over 3,000 feet in the waters off Japan's Bonin Islands. The squid, estimated at about 25 feet in length, was captured on camera attacking a baited line. In the process of trying to eat the bait, it managed to lose one of its feeding tentacles, which was recovered by the scientists and examined in detail. 2 years later, the same team filmed a giant squid at the surface, the first moving images ever captured of a living Architeuthis. The footage showed a creature clearly in distress, likely dying from exposure to the warmer, lower-pressure environment near the surface, but it was alive, and it was unmistakably a giant squid, its enormous eyes reflecting the lights of the research vessel. What we have learned about giant squid in the years since these first encounters is as fascinating as the myths that preceded the science. These are animals that live most of their lives in the mesopelagic zone, the twilight layer of the ocean between 600 and 3,000 feet deep. Here, sunlight fades to near total darkness, and the pressure exceeds anything a human body could withstand without technological protection. Giant squid have the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, sometimes reaching 11 inches or more in diameter. These enormous organs evolved to detect the faint bioluminescent glow of prey and the even fainter traces of light filtering down from the surface. In the perpetual twilight of the deep ocean, good eyes can mean the difference between eating and being eaten. The squid's 8 arms and 2 longer feeding tentacles are lined with suckers, each surrounded by a ring of sharp, serrated teeth. These suckers can leave distinctive circular scars on the skin of prey, and they have also been found on the bodies of sperm whales, evidence of the titanic struggles that must occur when whale and squid meet in the darkness. We know relatively little about how giant squid live. They appear to be solitary hunters, ambush predators that hang in the water column waiting for prey to approach. They eat fish and smaller squid, seizing their meals with lightning-fast strikes of their feeding tentacles. They reproduce through internal fertilization, with males using a specialized arm to deposit packets of sperm into the female's body. But there is so much we do not know. We have never observed their mating behavior. We do not know how long they live, though estimates range from about 5 to 10 years based on growth ring patterns in their statoliths, the internal structures they use for balance. We do not know how many of them there are, though the frequency with which they appear in sperm whale stomachs suggests that the population is substantial. And then there is the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, an even more impressive creature that makes the giant squid look almost modest by comparison. The colossal squid was first described in 1925, based on tentacles found in the stomach of a sperm whale caught near Antarctica. For decades, the creature was known only from such fragments, and many scientists doubted that it could be as large as the scattered evidence suggested. Those doubts were resolved in 2007, when a fishing vessel in the Ross Sea hauled up an intact colossal squid that was still alive when it reached the surface. The specimen, a female, weighed approximately 1,089 pounds and measured over 14 feet in length. Its eyes, the largest of any known animal, were nearly 11 inches across. But the most striking feature of the colossal squid, and what sets it apart from its giant cousin, is its weaponry. Where the giant squid suckers are ringed with teeth, the colossal squid suckers are equipped with rotating hooks, vicious structures that can dig into flesh and refuse to let go. These hooks explain the particularly severe scars found on some sperm whales, wounds that speak to desperate battles in the lightless deep. The colossal squid is found only in the Southern Ocean, the cold waters that surround Antarctica. It appears to live even deeper than the giant squid, descending to depths of over 6,000 feet. At these depths, the temperature hovers just above freezing, and the pressure would crush an unprotected human body like a soda can. In March 2025, scientists from the Schmidt Ocean Institute achieved something remarkable. They captured the first confirmed footage of a living colossal squid in its natural habitat. Using a remotely operated vehicle near the South Sandwich Islands, they filmed a juvenile specimen, only about a foot long, swimming at a depth of nearly 2,000 feet. The footage revealed details of the animal's behavior that had never been observed before, including its method of swimming and its response to the lights of the submersible. These real creatures, the giant and colossal squid, are proof that the ocean can produce animals worthy of the Kraken legend. They are massive, powerful, armed with suckers and hooks and beaks capable of tearing flesh. They exist in a realm so alien to human experience that we have only glimpsed it through robot proxies and recovered corpses. But they are also profoundly different from the monsters of myth. They do not attack ships. They do not create whirlpools capable of dragging vessels to the bottom. They are animals, subject to the same biological constraints as any other organism, and they spend most of their lives simply trying to find food and avoid being eaten by the whales that hunt them. The gap between the real creature and the mythological monster is instructive. The sailors who reported encounters with the Kraken were not entirely wrong. They were seeing something, probably dead or dying squid at the surface, tentacles waving in the current, enormous eyes staring blankly at the sky. But the stories they told, the monsters they described, were shaped by fear and imagination and the natural human tendency to make meaning from mystery. The truth, as is so often the case, is both less dramatic and more wondrous than the legend. Less dramatic because no squid is going to wrap its tentacles around a ship and pull it to the depths. More wondrous because the real animals live lives of absolute strangeness in a world we can barely access, seeing with eyes the size of dinner plates, fighting battles with sperm whales in the eternal darkness, existing in ways that challenge our assumptions about what life can be. As you rest and breathe and feel your body grow heavy, consider the colossal squid in its Antarctic home. Consider those rotating hooks, evolved over millions of years to grasp prey in an environment where any meal might be the last for weeks or months. Consider those enormous eyes, gathering every photon of available light. Consider a creature that lives its entire life in darkness and cold, never knowing warmth, never seeing sunlight, never encountering a human being until our machines finally found their way into its world. The ocean holds wonders beyond imagining. We have only begun to learn their names. The giant and colossal squid are not anomalies. They are examples of a phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism, the tendency of certain marine species to grow to enormous sizes in the deep ocean. Understanding this phenomenon helps explain why the sea has always been such fertile ground for monster legends and suggests that there may be large creatures in the depths that we have not yet discovered. Deep-sea gigantism has been documented across a wide range of species. The giant isopod, a relative of the common woodlouse, can grow to over 2 feet in length in the abyssal zone, compared to the inch or so that its shallow water cousins achieve. The Japanese spider crab, with a leg span of over 12 feet, is the largest living arthropod, dwarfing any land-based insect or arachnid. The oarfish, that ribbon-shaped fish with the bright red fin that has likely inspired countless sea serpent, reports can reach lengths exceeding 25 feet. Several factors contribute to this gigantism. One is temperature. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, and the deep ocean is uniformly cold, hovering just a few degrees above freezing regardless of latitude. This abundance of oxygen may support larger body sizes by allowing for more efficient respiration. Another factor is food availability, or rather the lack of it. The deep ocean is essentially a desert, with prey few and far between. In this environment, it makes evolutionary sense to grow large enough to survive long periods between meals, to store energy as fat, and to be capable of eating whatever food you happen to encounter regardless of its size. A large predator has a better chance of making it through the lean times than a small one. Pressure may also play a role, though the mechanisms are less well understood. The deep ocean is a high-pressure environment, with the water column pressing down with hundreds of atmospheres of force. Some scientists speculate that this pressure might allow for different structural properties in tissues and shells, enabling growth patterns that would be impossible at the surface. The oarfish deserves special attention in any discussion of sea monsters. This extraordinary creature, known to science as Regalicus glesn, is the world's longest bony fish. It has a silvery, serpentine body, a bright red dorsal fin that runs the entire length of its back like a crest or mane, and a habit of swimming vertically with its head pointed toward the surface. When an oarfish dies, it often floats to the surface, where its long, unusual body can be mistaken for a sea serpent by observers who have never seen anything like it. Oarfish live in the mesopelagic zone and are rarely seen alive by humans. When they do appear at the surface, it is usually because they are sick or dying. Several beachings of oarfish in California in recent years attracted considerable attention, with the enormous fish initially being reported as unknown creatures before scientists arrived to identify them. The match between oarfish characteristics and sea serpent descriptions is striking. Many historical accounts of sea serpents mention long, snake-like bodies, manes or crests on the head or back, and movement through the water in vertical undulations. All of these features correspond to what we know about the oarfish. It seems highly likely that at least some sea serpent sightings throughout history were actually encounters with this remarkable fish. But the oarfish cannot explain all sea serpent reports. Some accounts describe creatures with distinctly different characteristics, including horse-like heads, visible eyes, and behavior that seems more mammalian than fish-like. The diversity of descriptions suggests that multiple species, some known and some potentially unknown, may have contributed to the sea serpent legend. What else might be out there? The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface and reaches depths of nearly 7 miles in the Mariana Trench. Despite centuries of exploration, we have directly observed only a tiny fraction of this vast environment. New species are discovered every year, and many of them are large and strange enough to have prompted monster legends if they had been encountered by ancient sailors. Consider the megamouth shark, a species that was completely unknown to science until 1976, when the first specimen was accidentally caught off the coast of Hawaii. This filter-feeding shark can reach lengths of over 18 feet, yet it had somehow escaped detection throughout all of human history until that chance encounter. If something that large could remain hidden until the late 20th century, what else might still be waiting to be discovered? Or consider the coelacanth, the famous living fossil that was thought to have gone extinct along with the dinosaurs until a living specimen was caught off South Africa in 1938. The discovery of the coelacanth demonstrated that marine animals can persist for millions of years in deep-water refugia, hidden from human observation. Some scientists speculate that large marine reptiles, perhaps descendants of the plesiosaurs that went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous period, might still exist in isolated populations. This is the hypothesis most often invoked to explain the Loch Ness Monster and similar lake creatures. While no physical evidence supports this idea, and while most experts consider it highly unlikely, it cannot be entirely ruled out. The ocean is large, and our knowledge of its inhabitants is incomplete. More plausible is the possibility that previously unknown species of large fish, squid, or marine mammals remain to be discovered. Whales new to science have been identified in recent decades, including the spade-toothed beaked whale, known only from a handful of specimens. The diversity of squid species is poorly cataloged, particularly in the deep ocean, and there may be species that rival or exceed the known giants in size. The deep-sea researcher Edie Witter, who helped capture the first footage of a giant squid in the wild, has pointed out that our methods of exploring the ocean may be scaring away the very creatures we are trying to find. Bright lights, noisy propellers, and the electromagnetic fields generated by submersibles and remotely operated vehicles all announce human presence to organisms that have evolved in an environment of darkness and silence. The creatures that are most sensitive to these disturbances are precisely the ones that are most likely to evade detection. Witter has pioneered the use of stealth cameras that sit passively on the ocean floor, emitting no light and making no sound. These devices have captured footage of animals never seen before, creatures that the more intrusive methods of exploration had apparently been chasing away. If this approach is expanded, we may discover species that have remained hidden simply because our presence was warning them off. As you lie there in the comfortable darkness, consider what remains unknown. Consider the abyssal plains stretching across the bottom of the ocean, empty and cold and unexplored. Consider the trenches that plunge miles below the surface, environments so extreme that they might as well be on another planet. Consider all the creatures that have evolved to thrive in these alien conditions, creatures we have never seen and cannot imagine. Somewhere down there, something is swimming through the darkness, something that has never been photographed or filmed or examined by human eyes, something that will die and decompose and be recycled into the nutrients of the deep long before any of our machines happen to pass by. The sea still has monsters. We just have not found all of them yet. Throughout this long journey across time and cultures, through myths and sightings and scientific discoveries, a question has hovered in the background. Why do humans create sea monsters? What psychological need do these creatures serve? And why have they proven so persistent across every human society with access to the sea? Part of the answer lies in the nature of the ocean itself. Water is not our element. We cannot breathe it, we cannot see clearly through it, and we cannot move through it with anything like the grace and speed of creatures evolved for aquatic life. The ocean represents a fundamental limitation on human knowledge and power, a vast realm where our dominance over the natural world simply does not apply. This limitation creates anxiety. The human mind evolved on the African savanna, where threats could be seen from a distance and where survival depended on visual acuity and the ability to make quick judgments about whether something was predator, prey, or irrelevant. In the ocean, those evolutionary adaptations are useless. The water obscures our vision, muffles our hearing, and hides whatever might be approaching. We are vulnerable in ways that our ancestors never experienced on land. Sea monsters give form to this vulnerability. They transform the vague anxiety of oceanic travel into something specific and narratable. It is easier, psychologically, to fear a creature with teeth and tentacles than to fear the formless immensity of the deep. The monster becomes a focal point for all the dangers that the sea represents, a symbol that concentrates and contains our fears. Anthropologists have observed that dangerous environments tend to generate supernatural explanations. Mountains have their dragons, forests their werewolves, deserts their jinn. The sea, being perhaps the most dangerous environment humans regularly encounter, has generated the richest and most diverse menagerie of monsters. Every culture with boats and fishing has created beings to populate the darkness beneath the waves. But sea monsters are not simply projections of fear. They also embody wonder, the positive counterpart to anxiety. The ocean is not just dangerous, it is magnificent. Its scale exceeds human comprehension. Its depths contain wonders we can barely imagine, and its creatures, real and imagined, demonstrate possibilities that nothing on land can match. The mermaid is perhaps the clearest example of this ambivalence. She is dangerous, yes, capable of luring sailors to their deaths, but she is also beautiful, desirable, a figure of romantic longing. She represents the attraction of the unknown, the seductive call of mystery and adventure. To encounter a mermaid is terrifying, but it is also extraordinary, a moment when the boundary between the mundane and the magical dissolves. This combination of fear and fascination is characteristic of many sea monsters. Even the most terrifying creatures often have an element of awe attached to them. Jormungandr, the world-encircling serpent, is certainly a threat, but it is also magnificent, a being of cosmic scale whose existence gives structure to the universe. Tiamat, the chaos goddess, must be defeated, but her body becomes the raw material from which the world is made. These monsters are not simply obstacles to be overcome. They are sources of wonder and meaning. The persistence of sea monster beliefs into the modern era raises interesting questions about the relationship between science and myth. We might expect that as scientific knowledge expands, mythological explanations would retreat, and to some extent, this has happened. Educated people today do not generally believe in mermaids or krakens in the same way that their ancestors might have, but the legends persist, adapted to new contexts and new media. The Loch Ness Monster is a perfect example. Nessie emerged as a modern phenomenon in 1933, exactly at the moment when science was transforming our understanding of the natural world. The creature was interpreted through scientific categories, imagined as a surviving plesiosaur or some other prehistoric beast. The search for evidence took scientific forms: photographs, film, sonar, even DNA analysis. Yet the underlying psychological appeal remained essentially mythological, the same fascination with the unknown that had driven sea monster beliefs for millennia. Some scholars argue that sea monster legends serve a function that science cannot replace. They provide a sense of enchantment, a feeling that the world contains more than what can be measured and cataloged. In a culture that often privileges rational explanation over mystery, the persistence of monster beliefs might represent a psychological rebellion, a refusal to accept that everything worth knowing can be known. Others point to the role of community and tradition. Sea monster stories are not simply believed. They are shared. They create bonds between tellers and listeners, between generations, between members of communities united by their relationship to the sea. The fisherman who claims to have seen something strange is participating in a tradition that stretches back to the first humans who ventured onto the water. His story connects him to all those who came before and all those who will come after. There is also the simple pleasure of a good story. Humans are narrative creatures, and we crave tales that engage our emotions and imaginations. Sea monsters provide exactly the kind of material that makes for compelling storytelling. Danger, wonder, the struggle between humans and forces beyond their control. Even people who do not literally believe in sea monsters can enjoy the stories, can allow themselves to be transported to a world where such creatures are real. As you settle deeper into relaxation, consider your own relationship with these legends. You likely do not believe, in any literal sense, that Scylla waits in the Strait of Messina to snatch sailors from their ships. You probably do not think that the Kraken lurks beneath Norwegian waters, ready to drag down any vessel that passes too close. But something in these stories speaks to you, or you would not be here, listening to this long exploration of creatures that probably do not exist. That something is part of what makes us human. We are the animal that tells stories, the species that creates meaning from mystery. The sea monsters we have invented reveal our deepest fears and our highest aspirations. They show us what we think lurks in the unknown and what we hope to find there. They are mirrors reflecting the strange, wonderful, terrifying experience of being a conscious creature in an incomprehensibly vast universe. The sea monsters are us. They always have been. Our journey is nearly complete. We have traveled from the primordial waters of Babylonian creation, where Tiamat raged against the younger gods, to the frozen depths of the Southern Ocean, where colossal squid battle sperm whales in darkness no human eye has witnessed. We have heard the songs of sirens and the roar of the Kraken, walked the shores of Loch Ness and the beaches where Mommy Wada waits for her followers. We have examined myths and legends, eyewitness accounts, and scientific discoveries, trying to understand why the sea has always been such fertile ground for monsters. What have we learned? First, that the boundary between myth and reality is more porous than we might expect. The Kraken turned out to be based on real encounters with giant squid. The sea serpents of historical accounts may have been oarfish or basking sharks or unusual whale behavior. The mermaids that sailors reported were probably manatees and dugongs, glimpsed at a distance through eyes bleary from weeks at sea. Again and again, when we trace the legends to their sources, we find something real at the bottom. But the legends always exceed their sources. Real giant squid do not drag ships to the bottom. Real oarfish do not have the intelligence or the malevolence that sea serpent stories attribute to them. Real manatees cannot sing or lure sailors to their doom. The myths take something that exists and transform it into something more, adding layers of meaning and narrative that speak to human needs and fears. Second, we have learned that sea monster beliefs are universal. Every culture with access to the ocean has created beings to inhabit its depths. The specific forms vary, shaped by local environments and cultural contexts, but the underlying impulse is the same. Humans need to give form to the unknown, to populate the darkness with creatures we can name and describe and, in some sense, understand. The alternative, confronting the raw immensity of the ocean without any conceptual framework, is psychologically unbearable. Third, we have learned that the ocean still holds genuine mysteries. The giant and colossal squid were myth until they were science. New species of large marine animals continue to be discovered. The deepest trenches and the most remote waters remain largely unexplored, while the specific monsters of legend probably do not exist as described. The possibility that large, unknown creatures swim in the deep ocean cannot be entirely dismissed. The sea keeps its secrets well. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, we have learned that our fascination with sea monsters reveals something fundamental about human nature. We are creatures of the land, yet we are drawn to the sea. We fear its depths, yet we probe them with increasing sophistication. We create monsters to give form to our fears. Then we send our machines into the darkness to find those monsters and discover instead something stranger and more wonderful than anything we imagined. The ocean is the last frontier on Earth, the one place where genuine terra incognita still exists. The creatures that live there, from microscopic plankton to the largest animals ever to exist, are part of a living system that sustains all life on the planet, including our own. Understanding the ocean, protecting it, learning to live in harmony with its denizens, both real and imagined. These are among the greatest challenges facing our species in the coming century. As you drift towards sleep, let the images from our journey wash over you like waves. See Tiamat rising from the primordial sea, her monstrous children arrayed around her. See Jormungandr circling the world, his tail in his mouth, waiting for Ragnarok. See Scylla's 6 heads snaking down from the cliffs to snatch sailors from their ships. See the kraken ascending from the Norwegian deep, its arms spreading like the roots of a great tree. See the mermaid on her rock, her hair streaming in the wind, her voice carrying across the water. See the Bozu rising from the calm sea, black as night, demanding its barrel. See Mami Wada in her underwater palace, surrounded by the riches she offers to her followers. See the sea serpent of the deadless, sliding past the ship in the afternoon sun, its dark eyes meeting the eyes of the watching sailors. And finally, see the giant squid in the darkness, its enormous eye catching the faint glow of bioluminescent prey, its tentacles reaching out to grasp and hold. See the colossal squid, hooks gleaming, circling slowly in the Antarctic deep. See the oarfish undulating through the twilight zone, its red fin waving like a flag from another world. See all the creatures we have not discovered, all the monsters that are waiting in the depths, patient as only things that have swum through eons can be. Patient. The sea is old. It was here before us, and it will be here long after we are gone. The creatures that inhabit it, real and imagined, are part of a story that began billions of years ago and will continue for billions of years more. We are visitors to this world, brief witnesses to a drama that unfolds on timescales we can barely comprehend. But what witnesses we are, what stories we tell, what monsters we create. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the deep. Sleep now and dream of the ocean. Dream of the darkness and the pressure and the cold. Dream of eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles longer than ships. Dream of sirens singing and serpents coiling and spirits rising from the waves. The sea is vast, and it is full of wonders. If you enjoyed this exploration of the mysteries beneath the waves, please consider subscribing to this channel for more journeys into myth, folklore, and the hidden corners of our world. Every subscriber helps us continue bringing these stories to you, and your support means more than you know. Hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your favorite sea monster legend, and we will see you in the next one. Until then, may your dreams be deep and your seas be calm. Good night.